So today, the theme of the talk for today is we are never alone. We are never alone. And of course it's deeper than that. It goes much deeper than that. But that's a good place to start, because feeling alone, feeling tired, feeling afraid, these are part of the human experience. There is something within us that wants to feel connected, that wants to feel guided and protected. And we might even consider what Dr. Holmes tells us, that which we are seeking is causing us to seek. So we've been talking for the last several weeks about this idea of who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And we've used the concept of consciousness, pure consciousness, and that which we would call God, kind of making a descent. And this is just for descriptive purposes, right? There's no place to descend to for that which is all presence. But for the purpose of illustration, we consider that it makes a descent from pure consciousness down to grosser and grosser or more tangible levels, until it arrives in a being such as us. And by that I mean capable of self-awareness. Not only capable of thought, but capable of being aware of thought. We know that other creatures think. I mean, we can see how clever other creatures are. We can see the crows as they bend little pieces of wire and make hooks so that they can retrieve food out of a tight tube. We see how, for example, the working dogs, the shepherd dogs, see how they're able to move the sheep from one pasture to another. Almost in silent coordination, they know what to do, where to go. There's an intelligence. We can see them figuring things out, you know. But we don't know if they are aware of their own thoughts, or if they're just so familiar with their own thoughts that they don't even think about them. They just act upon them. But in the human being, we now have a creature, an expression of the divine, that is not only capable of being aware of consciousness, but of developing specific techniques and specific methods to experience more and more of the consciousness. So, at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, we're probably all familiar with the phrase, know thyself. And that was just one of several that was there. Know thyself. But what great advice is that? Know thyself. Know thyself. And that's really what we're talking about, and what we have been talking about, is that spirit or consciousness seems to make this descent into the material. And along the way, its awareness of itself seems to be hidden. But then, as us and through us, it kind of reascends. It kind of goes back up, right? So this is the symbol that we talk about. Dr. Holmes gives us the symbol of the circle with two horizontal lines to break it into thirds horizontally. And we have one line coming down, another line going up, so there's a letter V inside the circle. And that was the symbol that many religious science churches use. So divine consciousness sort of descends, through will and volition, through the activity of the law, which would be spirit and in soul, and it appears in a material form in body. But then consciousness awakens. Consciousness starts to awaken to its own nature, to its own true nature, and wants to know more. Wants to know more. Wants to know itself. Now, where does this desire to know oneself come from? As I said, we know that there are other creatures capable of extremely intelligent acts, but we don't yet know whether they have a desire to know themselves, to know what is consciousness, to know who am I, why am I here, where am I going. But we human beings do. Meister Eckhart tells us that God is like the child who clears its throat while playing hide and seek to be sure it will be found. I love the videos on TV with the little ones learning how to play hide and seek. The parents will say, well, where did he go? And the little one will stick its head around the corner and say, here I am, find me. They don't quite understand the purpose of the game is to stay hidden. And the divine is like that, according to Eckhart. The divine is there, and it's constantly waiting for us to make the discovery, and it's constantly clearing its throat and giving us signs and signals and saying, here I am. Come find me. Come love me. And our discovery of the divine within and around, in, as, and through us, it has to be spontaneous. It can't be something that we were born in full knowledge of, because we couldn't develop our uniqueness. We couldn't develop our beautiful, individualized understanding and perception and expression of life. See, we're all expressing this life in some unique way. But in order to be unique, we had to be left alone to make the discovery. So it is this place that we start our awakening from is a place of aloneness. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, is we're never really alone. You're not alone. We can't be alone. Because if we step back far enough, we recognize that we are part of all that there is. We are part of all that there is. So the example that I've given several times is if you were in a room and you had dark curtains over all the windows so that sunlight couldn't get through the curtains, it would be perfectly dark in the room. But then if you could take a little pin and make holes in the dark curtains, the sunlight would start to stream through. And if you look down on the floor, you would see all of these little dots. Now all of the little dots appear to be separated from one another. And on this side of the curtain they are. That's our experience. You can't tell me that that they're not separated from one another. I look at them and they're different, they're separate. But the reality is, if we can just move our consciousness to the other side of the curtain, they are not separated. They all come from the same source. And no matter how many pinholes we put in that curtain, the sunlight is never exhausted. We're not going to wear the sun out, You throw the curtain completely open, let all of the sunlight that can come in the room come in the room, and the sun is not exhausted by that. So the issue that we're dealing with is that our experience of life, our life experience, has been one of separation, has been one of apartness, has been and may continue to be one of otherness and different than. And all of this, of course, leads to alone, feeling afraid, feeling isolated. Now, what the result of that has been, because we are so familiar with the physical experience, we are so familiar with what it's like to experience life through these bodies, and you couple that with this idea that I am separated from everyone and everything, what that tends to do for us is it creates the orientation or the worldview that I have to do it myself. I have to do it myself. You give people a problem to solve, and they immediately sit down trying to solve that problem. They have to do it themselves. And one of the things that I had to do when we were doing team development in technical teams was to get them to stop trying to solve the problem themselves until they did a little research to see how other people may have tried to solve the same problem. Because what tended to happen, and we would do this deliberately sometimes just to make our point, is we would bring in a team of experts, engineers and designers and scientists and people very qualified to know what they were doing, and we would explain the problem to them. We'd give them all the facts and data, and we would let them go to work. And after about a half a day, they would come up with their solution. You've been in those kind of environments where to do a team presentation. Well, this is the solution that we found. And we would say, well, that's very great. Take a look at this. And then we would hand them the very same solution that somebody else, another team, came up with maybe 2 years before. And it didn't work. The solution didn't work, see. And we would do that. We would let them waste a half a day of their time doing that to reinforce with them the value of just going out and looking at what other people have discovered, what other people have done. Because there was an opportunity to learn from that. There was an opportunity to kind of recognize that we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. But from the spiritual perspective, it says we're not alone. See, we're not alone. We think we're alone. We think we have to do it ourselves. We think it's all about us, and we have to make it from our point of view. And if we could stop at the spiritual level, if we could stop and realize, but I'm not alone. See, I never have been alone. I could never be alone. Then these feelings of aloneness and separation and fear, see, then they go away. They dissolve. So Dr. Holmes tells us that there are more grains of sand in a handful of the beach than we can count. There are more stars in the heaven than we can count. And yet we find ourselves weak, tired, and afraid. Why is that? And then he goes on to say The Science of Mind, which is the textbook that he wrote. The Science of Mind deals with this issue. And we can look at that and say, well, yeah, sure, there's a lot of sand on the beach, and yeah, there's a lot of stars in heaven, but so what? What does that have to do with me? What does the fact? And last week on the Wednesday night Zoom group, Max was telling us that they've discovered a new galaxy somewhere within the universe, and it has hundreds of trillions of stars in it. Hundreds of trillions. So we have galaxies that have hundreds of trillions of stars in them, and I don't know how many galaxies we have in the universe. We start to think about how enormous this universe is, and then we say, but so what? So what does that have to do with me? What good does it do me, sitting here weak, tired, and alone, afraid, and alone? What good does it do me to know that there's those many stars? That there's all of that sand, grains of sand in a handful of the beach. And here's where it makes a difference. Here's where that kind of, why it's important. Dr. Frederick Bales, who was a religious science minister, he was an associate of Dr. Holmes. I think they were co-pastors out in California. And Bales wrote a book. My favorite is Your Mind Can Heal You by Frederick Bales. And he also wrote a book of, I think it's 12 basic lessons in the science of mind. A very good introduction for anyone who wants one. And Bales gives the example that he was counseling a very successful businessman one time, and this man was good at what he did in the business field. He was very successful, running a large organization, making lots of money, and all the things that, from the material sense of the world, we would look at and say, well, this guy had it made, you know. this guy's got it going. And yet he was anxious. He was worried. He was under a lot of stress, and it was affecting his health. So he went to see Dr. Bales. And Dr. Bales said to him, excuse me, he said, is there any place that you go? Is there any time in your life? Is there any set of circumstances when you can recognize absolute power, absolute peace, absolute calm? And the man said, yes. He says, every night at sunset. He says, when I get to watch the sun go down behind the Pacific Ocean. He says, when I see that big ball of orange and yellow as it just kind of goes down, it just kisses the ocean, you know, and then it starts to settle down. He says, when I'm watching that sunset, he says, I think of the power that's in the sun. He says, and I feel peace, and I feel calm, and I feel at awe just watching it. And Bales says, good, that's good. He says, now you must identify. Now you must identify with that power. You know what it is, you recognize it because it's already within you. It's already within you. The power and the peace and the calm that's within you is recognizing itself in that sunset. And instead of just thinking of it as being out there somewhere, you need to start to think of it as being in here, already within you. And of course the idea was quite simply that when the man recognized that the power that created the sun, the power that was expressing itself as the sun, the intelligence that created this entire universe with galaxies with hundreds of trillions of stars in them, is the same intelligence that created him, that is living its life as him, that is living its life through him. And he was not alone. He was not alone. So when he was in the business world and he was making decisions and they were successful, but he was always afraid. He was always afraid, but what if it doesn't turn out quite right? What if there's another way? What if there's a better way? So this is one of the things that when we looked at the characteristics of leaders, of CEOs in the business world, they had to be perfectly comfortable making a decision that they full well realized the decision may never come to fruition during their tenure as the CEO or even during their lifetime, making decisions so far down the road that they would never see what happened. And once they left that post, whoever came into that post might make different decisions that affected the one that they had just made. So they had to become very comfortable with the ambiguity of not knowing. And in so doing, they had to realize that this whole business of decision making was a process. So if you make a decision today, and in a year you find out there's another way or a better way, you make a different decision. That's all. That was it. Just make a different decision. Now this gentleman, what he had to realize was that there was an intelligence available to him. That which is guiding the sun around the heavens. That which is rotating the earth on its axis. That which is moving the galaxy through the universe is right where we are. Right where we are. So because our experience of life has been one of being confined in these bodies and experiencing everything we have experienced about life, or at least everything that we will admit to, right? And by that I mean there are senses that go beyond the five, but we tend to not want to talk about those or not be sure that they're there. So the majority of our life experience is through the physical senses and through the body, and that's our orientation, and that's what we know. And now what we must do as we grow is we must recognize that that was a perfectly appropriate stage of development. It was a necessary stage of development, necessary for us to develop our unique orientation to life. But now it is time for us to be aware of our own consciousness. Not just simply having thoughts and reacting to thoughts, but to be aware of our own consciousness and to deliberately ascend back to the pure, undifferentiated consciousness of spirit. And that's our spiritual growth. We need to move from this side of the curtain to the other side of the curtain. We must stop believing in separation and start believing in unity and in oneness and in power and in peace. So if we are going through life and we feel weak and tired or afraid or separated, if we feel those things, then those are just waypointers to show us in our lives where we believe in separation. This is where you believe in separation. And since we know that the separation cannot be a real and actual separation because we are all part of that one life, then the separation must only be an idea. An idea. Let me get some water here. I'm drying out. Excuse me, once that gas furnace starts running, everything is dry in here for sure. So I'm going to repeat that. Because separation cannot be real, cannot be true, then the separation that we are experiencing is only due to our belief in separation, only due to our ideas of separation. In other words, we have learned to believe in separation. We have learned to be afraid. Why are we afraid? Why are we afraid of anyone or of anything? We are afraid of it because we feel different than it. We feel apart from it. We feel that somehow it could hurt us. But what if we knew that we weren't different, we weren't apart, and that it couldn't hurt us, and that it wouldn't hurt us? What would happen to our fear? And Dr. Holmes tells us that it's sad that much of religion is based on fear. Many grow up being afraid of the very love that created them. You hear people say that God is a jealous God. You need to fear God. If you don't fear God, you're going to go to hell and suffer for eternity, and things like this, which are based on fear, and it is a learned fear. It is something that is learned. And what we want to do is we want to recognize that anything that we have learned, we can unlearn. We can unlearn. So, we develop sometimes bad habits as we're doing things. One example we used was learning how to play a sport, You want to learn how to play golf, you go get a club and you go to the range and you rent a bucket of balls and you just knock the bucket of balls out into the range, and you do that for a while, and then you think you're ready to go, so you go and you play around. And you can become proficient that way. You can entertain yourself. You can have fun with your friends. But at some point, excuse me, at some point you will go no further. At some point you will reach a plateau. And if you want to go further, what you have to do is you have to go to a coach. You have to go to a professional. And what that professional is going to do is to have you unlearn all of the bad habits that you taught yourself along the way, and then have you relearn how to do them properly. Stance or grip or swing or whatever the particular thing they're working with you is. So we go through life and we learn things that in fact may have even been appropriate at a certain phase in life. It was good. It was good when we were living in the wild. It was good to be afraid of the tigers. It was a good thing. The people who weren't afraid of the tigers, people who thought it was good to go pet tigers, they're not with us anymore. Those genes are gone. But now we have to go back and we have to look at all of these fears that are based on ideas of separation. We have to start unlearning them. This is why we're told perfect love casts out fear. If you know fear, you don't know love, and if you don't know love, you don't know God, to paraphrase the New Testament. So our opportunity as we are growing is to use our ability of self-reflection, thinking about what we're thinking about, using our ability of self-observation, and we can ask ourselves, do I feel alone? Do I feel weak? Do I feel tired? Do I feel afraid? And when we do, then we can say, why? What is there to be afraid of? What is God afraid of? What is omnipotence afraid of? What is omniscience afraid of? We come to realize that there is nothing for the divine to be afraid of, because the divine is one with everything, and it can't be afraid of itself. Think about that. It can't be afraid of itself. So if the divine is not afraid and yet I am afraid, then it is because there is a separation in my mind. And just like the gentleman that Dr. Bales said, you have to start to identify with that power that you sense and feel when you're watching the sunset. We too must identify with the intelligence and the power that has created the universe out of itself, that has created us as an integral part of that universe, and is ready, willing, and able to provide us with whatever we need to know, with all of the opportunities, with all of the ideas, with all of the helpmates, as we turn to it. It can't force itself upon us. Sometimes it seems like it's in the corner, kind of whispering to us loudly, clearing its throat while it's playing hide and seek. But it can't force itself upon us. Now, the only way we're going to know this, excuse me, is to try it. Intellectually, we can talk about it all day, but the only way you're going to know it is to try it. So let's just take a couple of examples. Let's look at health, for example. The love and the intelligence that created these bodies knew exactly what it was doing. The process by which the human body forms is literally a miracle in itself. I mean, if we watch it, we go, oh my God. You know, now of course young people are coming home and they've got the pictures of the sonograms, which we didn't have when we were kids. I think it was Howie Mandel said we only had police artist sketches back in the day. We had these little sonograms. We can see this little tiny baby growing in its mother's womb, and we can understand that cells are multiplying and they're dividing, and some are becoming soft and some are becoming hard, and some are becoming hearts, and some are becoming brain, and some are becoming eyes. And what wonderful intelligence guides that process without needing any help at all from us, you know. Can you imagine if I gave you a pen and paper and the most powerful calculator in the world and said, sit down and lay out a plan to take a sperm and an egg and produce a human being from that? Give me a plan for splitting DNA and then recombining it. Give me a plan for things to unfold so that eyelids and fingernails and eyelashes and ears and senses all develop. And you and I could not do it because we don't have the intelligence to do it yet. But that intelligence is already there. So that which knows how to create a perfect human body, as Bales tells us, it did not leave us when we were born, that intelligence. It beats our hearts still. It moves our lungs still. It digests our food still. And this is what we call health, the activity and the presence of God in our bodies. So if there's an area where we're experiencing a lack of health, it is an area where we are believing that somehow these bodies that are part of the very divine stuff and substance of the universe, somehow they can act independently and be sick. And our opportunity then is to dissolve those ideas of separation. When it comes to fulfilling self-expression, we have grown up thinking, well, I have to do it myself. I have to go out and make a career. I have to go out and do this, and I have to go out and do that. And it's true we must be active. But we want to let go of the idea that we're doing it all alone. Divine love as me has beautiful gifts to give, has beautiful talents to share, has wonderful ways to serve the spirit of humankind. And if before I do anything, I sit and be still and invite that presence to guide me, then I may find myself being in places I never really intended to go, but being in the right place at the right time and meeting the right people and finding the right position, and afterwards saying, well, I think it really found me. Fred Vogt was the senior pastor out at the Mile High Church in Denver for many years. And one time I heard him tell a story of before he entered the ministry, he worked in the business world, and he got laid off and he needed a job. And he had just started studying science of mind, and he was working with a practitioner, and they were doing treatment for his perfect position to unfold, and he was doing all of the ordinary things. He was printing up resumes. He was going up and down the street. He was going to the personnel department of the businesses. He was handing in his resumes. He was reading the want ads. He was doing everything normal people do when they're looking for a job. He was moving, right? An old saying, treat and move your feet, which comes from the Amish, who say pray and move your feet. Right? Set your intention and then get moving. Right? Because even God can't steer a parked car. You have to get into action. And as Fred was telling the story, he said that he had absolutely no luck. And he was down to his last nickel, and in those days a nickel would buy a cup of coffee. And he said, well, I might as well have a cup of coffee because this nickel's not going to do much of anything else for me. And I'm beat. So there was a little diner on the street. Excuse me. And he walked into that diner, and he put down his nickel, and he got his cup of coffee. And as he was sitting there at the counter, like the lunch counter diners, as he was sitting there at the counter, drinking his coffee, two men came in from one of the office buildings in the neighborhood, and they sat down at a little table within earshot of him, and they started talking. And one said to the other, said, well, I can't believe so-and-so's gone, that boy, they are going to be hard to replace. And said, yeah, whoever's going to replace so-and-so, well, they need to have this and this and this and this and this experience, credentials, education. And Fred said he's sitting there looking at his resume and saying, I got that. I got that. I got that. So he walked over and introduced himself to the man. And, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I didn't mean to be eavesdropping. He said, I just couldn't help but overhear what you're talking about. He says, who do I need to go see to apply for that job? He says, that's the perfect position for me. And they told him, go across the street in that building, go up to the 12th floor, ask for so-and-so. And he did. And he got the job. when we understand that we are connected to this higher intelligence and to this higher power, then we can find that we are being guided and we are being directed because we have declared our acceptance of it. It can't happen until we accept it. We're told that Spirit in heaven knows what we need before we ask, but we must ask believing in our hearts. Well, if Spirit knows what we need, why do we need to ask? Why does it just give it to us? And it's because we must accept. And asking, believing in our hearts is our way of acceptance. So what we want to consider then is we are never alone. Our experience up until now may have been largely biased to the experience of separation, of aloneness. But we are never alone. We are never separated from God. We could never be separated from God. We're like the fish looking for water. It is in us. It is around us. It is through us. Our bodies are made up of it. And what we want to do in this process of knowing ourselves, in this process of now deliberately working with our consciousness to climb back up that ladder, to reascend into the experience of pure consciousness, is we can use any ideas of separation as a rung on our ladder. Be honest with ourselves. Where do I feel alone? Where do I feel separated? Is it health? Is it wealth? Is it fulfilling self-expression? Is it loving relationships? When we learn to love ourselves, when we learn to realize that we are a beautiful expression of divine love with gifts and talents, then we find that we attract to ourselves others who feel the same way about themselves. The task at hand, if we want to call it a task, I don't think it's a task. I think it's a great adventure. The adventure at hand, excuse me, is to realize that up until now, and I love that phrase, up until now it's been a certain way. But not anymore. Not anymore. What is it you would do? What is it you would do if you knew that all of the universe was for you and none of the universe was against you? What would you do if you knew that all of the ideas, all of the money, all of the helpmates, all of the people, all of the resources, the buildings, whatever, what would you do if you knew that all of that was available? What would you do if you knew you could not fail? What would you do? So many times I think we hold ourselves back with the idea, well, I'm only human. I'm only human. And being human is only part of the equation. Divine love is always with us. We are never alone. We are never only human. We must acknowledge its presence. We must turn to it for guidance. I love when we were children, growing up in school. Excuse me. And the nuns would tell us that we had a guardian angel whose job it was to look after us. And of course, some had tougher jobs than others. But we were encouraged to speak to that presence as a real friend, as a real entity, to tell it, to confide in it our fears, our worries, to ask for help, to ask for guidance, And what a beautiful idea. Of course it was slanted to the mind of a child, but what a beautiful idea for a child to teach them the presence is real. And of course it was in the form of a guardian angel, but it's still the presence, you see. It is still the presence. Dr. Holmes tells that we need to court it like it was our best friend. We need to treat it like we would treat our best friend. We need to talk to it like we would talk to our best friend. We need to understand that we're not alone. The love, the presence, the power, the intelligence of the divine is right here with us, right now. Know thyself. Know thyself as a spiritual being. Know thyself as the very love and presence of God that has descended down into this form of a human being to express itself as you, to express itself as me, to discover itself in some unique way as us, to give its gifts and talents in some unique way through us. And all of God is for us. None of God can be against us because we are part of it, and it knows no sense of self and other. So I invite you this week, take some time, be still, invite the presence to make itself known to you, to comfort you, to guide you, to encourage you, and to lead you back up the ladder of ascent. And so it is.